Hello, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Manasi Vaidya. I'm an editor at Global Data Insights, where I cover the pharma sector, and I will be your host for today. It is our pleasure to have you with us to discuss the topic of From Clinical to Commercial, how to build a scalable digital foundation in CGT manufacturing. I would like to introduce you to our webinar platform. This webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect, click the link you received via email to rejoin the session. We encourage you to ask any questions using the Q&A widget or by using the Ask a Question box. We will try and get to as many of these as possible once the demonstration of the live lab has concluded. Please use the Help widget if you experience any technical difficulties or require any assistance. You can also use the related content box to access additional resources. Today's webinar is brought to you by MasterControl, a company that offers the world's leading solutions for product quality, helping highly regulated companies ensure quality and compliance in their life sciences operations. Today's guest speaker is Caitlyn Minton-Smith, who has over 15 years of experience in the life sciences industry and extensive expertise in online, print, and visual media communications. In her current role as Senior Product Marketing Manager, she is responsible for creating go-to-market strategies, developing product positioning, crafting messaging, and executing strategic marketing campaigns, and has been directly involved in the launch of several MasterControl products. Caitlyn brings comprehensive product, market, and customer knowledge to deliver innovative solutions to deeply rooted problems and strives to empower cross-functional teams to maximize success. We also have Adrienne Mendoza with us, who is the Chief Operating Officer of PPG Advanced Therapies, a mission-driven nonprofit organization working to redefine how patients access life-saving cell and gene therapies. She's leading efforts to challenge outdated models and remove the barriers that limit access to these treatments. So we're gathered here today to talk in detail about the cell and gene therapy, or CGT space, which has made tremendous advances as the science and technology behind producing these therapies has been developed over the last few decades. In 2024 alone, the US FDA approved seven cell and gene therapies which treat conditions ranging from melanoma, hemophilia B, and synovial sarcomas. Gene-modified cell therapies, which encompass chimeric antigen receptor or CAR-T therapies like Yescarta and Kymriah, led to product sales of over $4 billion in 2023 and are expected to reach $34.4 billion by 2030 at a CAGR of 35.9% as per a global data analysis. The manufacturing for advanced therapeutic medical products, or ATMPs, involves highly specialized engineering systems, tightly controlled protocols, and requires detailed planning around production and delivery. Larger upfront investments are also needed to establish the manufacturing protocols, sterile environments, and process handling for ATMPs, which also influences therapy prices and also access. Additionally, the need for automation has been driving digital innovation in this space to design more reliable processes. I will now hand this over to Caitlyn, who will take us through our webinar for today, which is titled From Clinical to Commercial, How to Build a Scalable Digital Foundation in CGT Manufacturing. Caitlyn, over to you.
Thank you, Manasi. Hi, everybody. So excited to be here and very excited to be presenting with Adrienne Mendoza today. Adrienne, did you want to add anything to the introduction provided by Manasi, maybe around BioBridge Global and PPG Advanced Therapies?
Sure. Thanks for having me on today. It's very exciting to be here too, and thanks to the audience for joining. Yeah, so actually, she really covered it really well. We're really focused on, just as she said, identifying the barriers to access that prevent these cell therapies from really getting to patients. And some of those relate to manufacturing, which we're going to go over, and some of them relate to the variability in materials that come in. So we'll go over both of those things, and I'm very excited to be part of some of the solutions that are being brought to the table.
Awesome. Well, just to briefly go over what we'll be talking about today. As noted, we are going to be focusing a lot on the impact of process control in cell and gene development and how you can really leverage standardization regardless of where your company is in their life cycle. We will talk a little bit about the unique demands of advanced therapy manufacturing and navigating that variability like Adrienne just talked about. Then we will dive into some concrete examples of how you can break through bottlenecks with digital tools, especially focusing on ones that can scale with you. And then finally, we'll talk about the real-world implications of good and bad processes on cell and gene therapy development and how you can start to build an infrastructure that serves you now and into the future. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Adrienne.
Perfect. So this slide really just represents, in a way, the complexity of the various processes involved in creating a cell or gene therapy. Starting on the far left, the autologous cell therapies obviously have every single batch is its own unique batch with patient cells determining quite a bit of what goes on next. You've got your cold chain delivery, the logistics around that. Then you isolate the cells, transduce them, expand the cells, and ultimately they're cryopreserved and then sent back to the individual patient. So quite a bit of complexity there and things to control and watch out for, as well as to track for chain of identity and chain of custody. And the allogeneic cell therapies, also you have some variabilities from each donor specific product, but you're manufacturing multiple batches. There's still the cold chain logistics to handle, the isolation of the cells, expansion of the cells, ultimately the differentiation if necessary. And then again, going back to the cold chain logistics to get to patients in time, just in time when they need it. And then the gene therapy, your plasmids, obviously have some more conformity of things coming in and tighter controls, but you still have quite a bit of variability built into the process. And each individual batch might be variable sizes depending on the patient population being treated. So quite a bit of complexity here. And all of this is area for opportunity for improvement within the industry today, and I'm sure in the years to come too, but excited about some of the advancements coming into the space, including the use of AI when data is available to really support these. So when we think about the materials coming in, as I mentioned in the prior slide, there's a great deal of variability. When it comes to autologous therapies, as I mentioned, every single donor or patient in that case will have their own cell morphology, and there's characteristics to build process variability downstream to support so that the final product can be as consistent as possible. So we can control the processes downstream, even though the materials input are often uncontrollable. You don't have the selection capability as you would with a donor, for example, a healthy donor coming into an autologous workflow, or sorry, allogeneic workflow, will be able to have more controls put in place to assure that the material meets a certain conformance. But with an autologous cell therapy, that's not possible. And oftentimes this is the patient's last option before they run out of options. So there's no time to really do anything but build the processes to suit the variability of the materials coming in so that you can ensure as much as possible that that patient will get their product back. So I think, as we think about process design, we need to think about the fact that the materials coming into these processes, no matter what they are highly variable. There's a lot of complexity that goes into these things. And at the end of the day, each batch represents a life-saving product. So building for the processes, ensuring that we know there's high variability coming through, we know it's complex handling, but how can we control and standardize those things as much as possible so that the product ultimately reaches the patient? That's really the goal here. And when variability is the standard, what do you have to do? You have to control what you can. You have to track the chain of identity and the custody of how those products changed hands. You need to enforce the parameters in which you can operate within. How are your variables considered in the downstream processes? How can you adapt your downstream process to support the variability of the incoming starting material so that you can produce a final product that's as consistent as possible. And then how are you testing for those things? How is your in-process quality control being evaluated, monitored? How quickly is it being reviewed so that the product can move on its way to the next process? How are you qualifying your trainer, or how are you qualifying and training your staff and your technicians so that they can complete this process, which is highly variable and complex? How do they know how to handle those variabilities? And ultimately, your equipment, your assets, your materials that you're using, how reliable are they? Are they going to give you a consistent product at the end of the day that you can count on no matter what? And is it portable? Is it something you can carry out in other places, in other markets? Or is it something that's unique and has to be specific to a particular region? And then ultimately, the complex logistics and the orchestration of product release. Again, where the time is ticking on these products, there's often very little time for error or delay. So making sure that those processes that we're building from the start allow for that product to be released as quickly as possible, and for all the things that need to be checked upstream to be available for the operators to review, for the quality assurance team to review, so that product can go to the patient. And then I think lastly, just to sum this up before I turn it back over to Caitlyn, is that we have to think about the things that can go wrong. This is really about risk assessment. When we build a process that understands that things can go wrong in the chain of identity, things can go wrong in quality control and in the shippings and logistics, how do we account for those within the process design and the recording of data so that we can make decisions quickly, we can use all the information available to make a decision that will ultimately serve in the best interest of the patient. It needs to be a safe product. It needs to be an effective product. But how much can we rely on our data to ultimately tell us whether or not we can make a decision to move forward so that that product can be administered in the end? All right, well, with that, I think I'll turn it over to you, Caitlyn, to round out anything I might have missed, and then also to tell us more.
No, thank you so much, Adrienne, for giving your perspectives. I think that you have such a wonderful view of this and have just so much passion around this area. And one of the things that, as Adrienne and I were prepping for this, we talked a lot about is just everything kind of begins and ends with the patient. Ultimately, everything that you're doing is to help a patient at the end of the day. And anything that gets in the way of that can really impact, obviously, the outcomes for that specific patient. And to kind of underscore some of that, I went through and worked with Adrienne to select a couple common process inefficiencies, we'll say, that can lead to bottlenecks in cell and gene production and delivery. And I've outlined 4 examples here, and then also some of the ways that you can build that process control regardless of the maturity of the organization. So typically, I think a lot of folks think, oh, I'm not big enough to start to implement something. And this is really going to hopefully help you understand that regardless of where you are in your maturity, or regardless of how large your organization is or how small it is, that there are opportunities for really putting in processes from the very beginning. So starting off, a really big bottleneck is quality assurance, quality control. So I think everybody here knows that quality control is essential to ensuring safe and effective therapies. But in cell and gene manufacturing, the time it takes for that testing and that QA review can often add days, hopefully not weeks, but possibly. And when you have, as Adrienne said, somebody on the other end of this, where this therapy might be kind of their final chance, you don't necessarily have days. Every manual handoff that you have, every paper record, every courier shipment can create a new opportunity for delay or break in that chain of identity that Adrienne was talking about. And as I mentioned, for patients with aggressive disease, those delays can mean that their condition progresses before infusion, which is obviously what we are all trying to avoid. So how do you start building this foundation? How do you start building kind of a scalable digital foundation? And as Adrienne mentioned, really the way forward is to control what you can. It's to control those processes. You can have all the equipment in the world, all the bioreactors, but if you can't control your processes, it's going to be very, very difficult to kind of get from point A to point B to point C to the patient. So digital data capture really streamlines your QA and QC logistics by creating that single reliable source of truth. Again, this could be implemented whether you are small or kind of clinical, all the way up through commercial. When you're a smaller organization, even simple tools like an electronic batch record or digital document management can really reduce those transcription errors and secure that identity tracking. And as companies grow, they want to connect that digital document management, maybe become a full QMS, bring in an EBR or a LIMS to really ensure that you're having that consistency in your quality, in your production, in your testing, across your benches, labs, and sites. And then at a commercial scale, kind of that full end-to-end integration and automation enables those therapies to remain compliant, but be released faster. And that really enables you to treat more patients more rapidly. Again, really what I'm trying to underscore here is that regardless of where you are on your maturity spectrum or where your company sits today, there are opportunities for you to control processes and to really embrace digital opportunities to get therapies out faster, to make sure that they're compliant, all of those things that I think everybody wants to do. The next bottleneck I wanted to touch on is comparability and tech transfer. And I think that no matter the type of manufacturing that you do, tech transfer is a bear. Nonetheless, tech transfer is always a challenge. And comparability is one of the toughest hurdles in advanced therapies. Anytime one of your processes changes or it moves between sites, you have to go back and prove that that therapy is still the same in safety and purity and potency and quality. And then on top of this, regulators are really sharpening their expectations around advanced therapies. Something that I read that Adrienne had written a couple weeks ago was, I believe you said that in Europe, there are 27 regulatory bodies. Is that right, Adrienne?
Yes, 27 different, well, there's EMEA, which provides regulatory authority, but each country within the EMA or EU has the responsibility for determining whether or not a product can go forward within their country and be administered, as well as whether there's reimbursement. And even within the 27 countries, there are provinces. So it's a very complex landscape to not only get approval for a cell or gene therapy in Europe, but also to administer them there and to ultimately get approval at the state and province level.
Which blows my mind. I mean, that just feels almost like an insurmountable mountain to climb, having to think about all of that. And really, when you think about tech transfer, it's about reducing that risk. And Adrienne talked a little bit about that. It's all about risk mitigation. Because as you move from site to site or as a process changes, your equipment may differ, your operators work differently, you may have some SOP drift. And so you're really just trying to control what you can by documenting and embedding the software or the tools to help you to avoid poor tech transfers or poor comparability that can lead to repeat validation runs or extra inquiries from regulators or delays in patient access. So how do you try to make it as standardized as possible? And it's really just those digital controls. A light QMS with control document management can help smaller companies keep your SOPs and templates really harmonized from the start. So even if you're still in a clinical environment, this helps you to start building that foundation and making sure that everybody is working from the same information. As your programs scale, you can bring in things like an EBR or a lab information management system to create consistent and comparable data sets across multiple instances, whether that's across multiple clean rooms or benches or facilities, even if you are scaling at that level. And then when you get to kind of the enterprise or commercial scale, really these full integrations are giving you this kind of harmonized and regulatory ready evidence is embedded. It's sort of by default. And that really starts to create that digital backbone that makes comparability a built-in capability rather than a last-minute scramble to ensure that you have everything, how do I say this, all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, I guess is the best way to say it. The third bottleneck that I wanted to touch on is workforce variability and the idea of kind of institutional knowledge. Cell and gene manufacturing is very operator intensive. I do not need to tell you this. You are well aware. In early stage autologous therapies, the skill of the operator can really make the difference between a successful batch and a deviation, which sounds a little bit wild to say, but it's very true. And really what we see is that as programs shift, or I'm sorry, as programs add shifts or sites or possibly decentralize, that tacit know-how can begin to fracture. So what one operator does instinctively, or perhaps they were taught by an old timer, may never be written down and it gets lost. And that can lead to inconsistent execution, that can lead to inspection findings or even failed batches. So what we like to talk about a lot is federating knowledge as you grow. And how do you do that? Again, look at digital tools. You can start with a really basic QMS so that your operators are always working from the proper SOP. And as you scale, you can bring in EBRs, and those EBRs, those electronic batch records, have embedded digital work instructions and checkpoints to make sure that training is captured in real time, to ensure that your operators are able to do what they are trying to do. And then at that commercial scale, in MES and learning management system kind of integration can really start to standardize those qualifications and can really flag if somebody can't do something or make it so they can't move forward. And it's really at the end of the day more about, it's not just about reducing errors. It's really about building and expanding and scaling your workforce while maintaining quality control, so that you can ensure that every therapy that leaves your doors is safe, is consistent, is compliant, and really is going to help the population that it's intended for. The final thing I'm going to touch on, and the final bottleneck, and Adrienne talked a little bit about this, is kind of this idea of just asset reliability. In really any type of manufacturing, but I'd say particularly in advanced therapies, if you have an incubator or a freezer or a biosafety cabinet that drifts out of tolerance, it can invalidate an entire batch. And as Adrienne pointed out, sometimes these batches are autologous. Sometimes it's my cells coming back to me. And if that batch can't be processed for some reason because something's drifted, it can really cause an issue with getting that therapy back to the patient. In addition, regulators and regulatory agencies really expect all of your equipment to remain in a validated state 100% of the time. And they require that the calibration and cleaning and maintenance are documented at every step. However, when that calibration lapses, when that maintenance is missed, when an alarm isn't followed up on, that's when you hit a bottleneck. And even those small deviations can lead to, like I said, rejected batches or inspection citations. So how can you help to mitigate some of this? Digital infrastructure can help you build resilience. At the clinical stage, a CMMS, or a computerized maintenance management system, ensures basic calibration schedules and deviation tracking. As programs scale, you can integrate with an MES or a LIMS to add visibility into that equipment status before each run, so you can ensure that you are only using equipment that is cleaned, calibrated, maintained, and ready to go. And then at the commercial scale, we're really starting to see the possibilities of AI, I would say, come to life. I mean, all over manufacturing, but I think there's something interesting about how we're seeing it come to life in asset management, where we're looking at patterns. We're looking at what a type of machine or something within the process is doing, and being able to establish patterns and being able to really predict what's going to happen prior to it happening. And what that means is that what we are starting to see is the simplification or the ability for manufacturers and producers to really have more confidence in their systems or in their assets, that their assets are always ready to go. Really, at the end of the day, and again, I think Adrienne kind of touched on this, is that without reliable assets, you can't deliver reliable therapies. And this asset reliability and this asset control can sometimes be overlooked, frankly, in any manufacturing. And it's a highly critical component of manufacturing in general, and particularly cell and gene manufacturing. So these bottlenecks highlight some of the complexities around cell and gene therapies and why process control matters as much as the insane and amazing science that you all work on every single day. And while, as we've talked about, digital infrastructure can help kind of putting it into practice is a very different story. And so I wanted to invite Adrienne back to kind of help bring this to life. Adrienne?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So in our organization, which we are a contract manufacturing organization, we provide starting materials as well. We've built a system, actually we use MasterControl as our quality management system and our manufacturing suite. So that means that we've built everything within the system to capture all of those quality management things. So a deviation that comes up and out of spec, a change control for the process, the documentation, all of that's recorded. But we also are actually tracking every step in the process, from the collection of the cells through to the testing and the manufacture, the release, the chain of custody, all within one system, which is extremely helpful when it comes to the availability to support our customers with data that ultimately supports AI-driven insights. And it speeds the turnaround time of getting batches released, because we can ultimately know that our system captured that the operator was trained, that the equipment was qualified, that any out of spec was evaluated and investigated, signed off before the product can be released, and the whole host of controls that are necessary around good manufacturing practices are there. So, the real world impact at the end of the day is that every single product that's manufactured, no matter what systems are used, no matter who's carrying those out, we have to think about the patients in the end. And even in a clinical trial, I often think about the sacrifices and the real world impact to the patient of even getting into that clinical trial. Most likely, as Caitlyn talked about, this is their last resort. They may have had every other drug that's available to them tried, and maybe it worked for a little while, maybe their cancer regressed, and that's why they're now qualified to be in a clinical trial. I think about a story of a young lady in South Dakota, her name's Donielle, and she had, similar to many people in these situations, no other option in the place she lived in South Dakota. And she had gone through chemotherapy, radiation, had Hodgkin's lymphoma. It kept returning. She even had a stem cell transplant. But at the end of the day, her final, options really were to enroll in a clinical trial 1,500 miles away from where she lived. So that meant she and her mom packed up her car and they drove that distance. They were one of the lucky ones because many people can't make that drive, right? It's the sacrifice that's involved in each one of the stories behind the scenes of the patients, of their hope for the cure, hope for an opportunity to live longer, and the traveling that they do to actually even get to the clinical trial. She was able to get enrolled. She received her dose. It was an autologous cell therapy, CAR T, and she's alive today. She was able to make it. Her cancer's gone. And those are the beautiful stories of, survival, but that doesn't happen if we can't get the product released. If there's a time constraint, if there's a chain of custody issue, if there's a quality mishap that couldn't be investigated on time, days are of the essence and people's lives are on the line. And there's stories like that play out on the degree of thousands every month as clinical trials go on underway. And as we build commercial readiness and commercial therapies are available, that's amplified into the tens of thousands. So every single person has a story. That's what we're all doing this for. And I think the real world impact of data and collection of it in an electronic format, in a batch record, it means that lives get saved. So it's a worthy investment of time and consideration of how you build those processes and how you invest in early even in clinical trial settings, in those systems to really allow you to make sure that people like Donielle get their product, get the thing you're working on so hard to get to patients. So, yeah.
I love that story. Thank you. Adrienne actually shared that story with us during our prep call, and it underscored to me, MasterControl is a software company, and we get to be this very, 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 very small part of the work that Adrienne and her teams and all of you do, all of our clients do, which feels phenomenal. But I think that sometimes we forget that at the end of this is a patient, and oftentimes a quite ill patient who is really trying the next thing or the last thing potentially. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I also wanted to touch on something that I read in your LinkedIn newsletter a couple weeks ago. You were talking about being in Barcelona for Advanced Therapies Europe, and your newsletter was underscoring the idea of decentralized manufacturing and what that could look like and how that could, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of bring therapies closer to the patients, right? So in Donielle's example, what if she didn't have to go 1,500 miles? Maybe she only had to go 100 miles or 200 miles because that therapy was sort of closer to her. And can you talk just a little bit about where you see decentralized manufacturing in this space going, and how that kind of plays into processes and process control?
Yes, absolutely. Traditional pharmaceuticals, we all know, were built on a centralized system. So you could mass produce, millions of doses and distribute that to pharmacies everywhere. And the reality is that currently the therapies that we provide today and cell and gene therapies are very limited in access. We all know that. And that means people do, like Donielle, have to travel thousands of miles to participate. And often they just can't do that. So only 1 out of 10, I believe, currently eligible patients even receive a cell therapy or gene therapy. It might be less. I think it's imperative upon us in the industry to look at ways to bring those closer. So there's 2 ways, I think, primarily that's going to be accomplished. One is to no longer rely on a centralized manufacturing model. We need to to build sort of hubs where products can not only be collected nearby where the patient lives, but also be processed there. That's achieved when you have built centralized systems, right, processes and controls that can be carried out in numerous places in the same way, in the same manner, tracked real time, tracked in a live way, released from a central team that knows what is allowed and what's not allowed to be distributed. But that is only enabled with digital traceability of all the inputs that went into the process. And that needs to be done real time and as quickly as possible. So you can have equipment placed in regional facilities, around the world, nearby where patient cells are collected or where vectors are being produced and provided to the patient. But it's enabled through tools like electronic batch records, like automation if possible, and those allow for the scale and distribution of those processes to be carried out in a way that we're going to need to in order for these therapies to be successful. So we have to really build for the automation and the digital traceability now in all of these processes in order for it to scale into a decentralized model of the future, where these therapies are manufactured close to the patient and then administered in a way that is shortening that vein-to-vein time. They have the eligibility determined, they're very sick. If they can get their cells collected and rapidly the next week, the next few days, administered that product, it's life-saving, and it will also reduce the cost of delivery. The logistics and the burden of these cells traveling place to place is significant in this industry, and it is for vectors as well. So whether it's cell or gene therapies, I think that's the world we're going to have to move to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it really underscores the accessibility, right, of these really phenomenal and amazing acts of science that I know that that's one of the things that I read a lot about in kind of the advanced therapies world is just that accessibility, where we have this amazing these amazing tools, these amazing therapies, these amazing treatments, but getting them to the right people can be really challenging. What you're talking about is reminding me just a little bit of a story from one of our clients who is an autologous therapy manufacturer. And when we started to talk with them and they were talking about their production process, their manufacturing process, and where they were hitting issues, it was really around the flexibility of the system, which I thought was interesting. Because it is a batch of one, they needed something that was really flexible. And because they could find something that did have the flexibility that they needed, they were able to expand and make that therapy available to more people. Because they can work faster, they can document those processes. I believe that they now have more than one kind of manufacturing facility for this scattered throughout the country so that they can get those things to those end patients faster, which is really cool to think about. It's just, the science blows my mind. What you guys do blows my mind. I don't know how else to put it. All right. Well, I want to definitely leave time for some Q&A. So thank you for those insights and sharing your stories, Adrienne. I wanted to just wrap up on kind of how do you start to build a scalable digital infrastructure? And I think that Adrienne touched on this a couple times. It's really about laying a foundation early. So you want to start building when you're small or when you're starting, so that as you scale out or scale up, it doesn't require retrofits, and you are making sure that you are standardized from the get-go. So things like a QMS for controlled documents, SOPs and training, and digital identity and chain of custody. And even in the earliest programs, getting these basics right can really reduce those errors and ensure that reliability. And for example, I believe in Danielle's case, that was a clinical program. Is that correct, Danielle or
Yeah.
Adrienne?
Yeah, she was exactly. She was the 8th patient enrolled in a clinical trial in North Carolina.
Wow. And once those foundations are in place, the next step is really starting to bring things together. So standalone tools, paper records, as easy as they feel when you are smaller, they really can't keep up as programs grow and you start to introduce risk. So as you start to grow, you really want to find systems that can be connected so that you can capture structured data at the source and then share it across your systems. That really helps to speed up your review and your release and ensures that as you grow, again, whether it's across benches, lab sites, your processes are really staying aligned. So what integrations does for you in finding systems, this is sort of why I get a little bit preachy about digital systems, is that digital systems and digital data has the ability to be integrated, to be connected to one another. And so you end up breaking down a lot of silos and you really result in a single source of truth, which is hypercritical as you want to expand or as we go into a decentralized model. You want to make sure that everybody is working from the same information. And then finally, think about scale from the beginning. And I think that this can be hard to do, but when you start thinking about building a digital foundation from the start, and if you can think about how you are going to scale up and out from the beginning, it makes it easier to do that. It makes it easier to go bigger, to decentralize, to, always deliver a consistent product. So think about workflows. How do they become EBR, MES ready? How would you maybe tie in your calibration and maintenance, whether that's systematized or others, to really preserve and ensure that validated state? And really, where does automation come into play? Where does automation actually start to reduce risk and really lean into that? That can be as simple as using a scanner on a barcode so that you don't have to type something in, to as complex as having, one system trigger, let's say your batch record, and another system once a set of parameters are met. And when you have a strong digital foundation, scale doesn't necessarily lead to complexity. It actually becomes more reliable because you've set these systems and you've built from the start to be successful. And that's really the point here, right? Is that fewer deviations, faster release, those aren't just operational gains. This isn't a ingredient out, ingredient in and therapeutics that's very shelf stable out. This really is about creating consistency, creating, I just completely lost my word. Creating consistency and really ensuring that every single one of these are compliant and that they can get out as quickly as possible. Because what you guys do on a daily basis, I don't need to tell you this, really directly determines how quickly patients can access therapy. And in many cases, whether they receive it at all. And so, I'm a big proponent of those digital systems, as Adrienne said, just really thinking about how those help you to accelerate and help you to really stay organized. Adrienne, anything to add?
No, I love it. And I can't wait to hear also from the questions that the audience might have, because it is so interesting to hear what challenges might be coming up for those of you guys who are working in this field, whether you're seeing some of the same things, what considerations you're making as you're investing. And, funding's tight right now. It is a challenge, but we're all in it together. We're working on it as a team. So we're here to help and answer any questions you guys have as well.
All right, Manasi, with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you to start our Q&A.
Thank you both. This was a great session. I'm sure the attendees and myself, I think we got a really good illustration of what it's like behind the scenes, and also get the patient's perspective, who, frankly speaking, is at the center of all of it. So thank you for providing such great examples of how your work has been impacting patients out there who want to access these therapies. So getting right to it, just a reminder for all our attendees, in order to ask any questions, please send them in via the Q&A box that you might see at the bottom of your screen. We already have a couple of questions, so I'll just dive right into it. I think this one might be for Caitlyn. If you could invest in only one digital capability early, what would you recommend giving, or let me try to kind of understand what they're trying to ask. What do you think would give the biggest return as you scale?
It's a good question. I will answer this from a software perspective, and then I would love to hear Adrienne's answer from somebody who is sort of in the trenches. So I think that documentation, controlled documentation, is probably where I would tell someone to start. And when I say controlled documentation, it goes beyond, you know, a SharePoint or something like that, and really into making sure that you can track when something has changed. So having strong change control, having strong like approval workflows and things like that, so that either as you scale or as processes change, as they're wont to do in, you know, clinical environments, that you are able to track that and really provide that traceability. And I think that this is where this to me is where finding the right partner is really important, where they can grow with you as you grow. You know, one of the things that I hear from clients a lot is, oh my gosh, I've outgrown XYZ system, and that's why we want to talk to you. And so I think that finding systems and finding partners that can grow with you, regardless of what that software is really important. But I'd say starting with controlling your documentation so that everybody is working from the same single source of truth, and making sure that that folks, limiting the opportunity for deviation from that documentation. That's my software perspective. But like I said, I would love to also hear from Adrienne, who is very much more in the trenches.
Yeah, I think it's, I think I would agree with you in all of those points. The ability to have, if you had only one, it sounds like the question was one digital capability, investment of one digital capability. And that's tough, but I think you have to start somewhere. And that somewhere, in our case, I think we did it the right way. We created the investment in our quality management system first, because that would allow us to add on to that the electronic batch records that tie back to the quality management system and tie back to the document control. But, you know, any of us, we get into an audit scenario or in a pre-approval inspection, they want to go back. If you're submitting your CMC data in your clinical trial, being able to make sure you have the training records established, the controlled documentation, so your quality management system being able to show your SOPs, your training of your operators, your qualification of equipment, your procedures for releasing and quality controlling your batch. Those are all critical things that are expected of any regulatory body in the world. But if you build in your quality management system digitally first, you can then add on to that digital tool with electronic batch records and other ultimately AI-driven initiatives that can help you evaluate your data even more as you grow. So if I had one investment to make, I would do a quality management system initially.
Thank you for that. Always interesting to hear different perspectives. And hopefully that's really helpful to our attendees as well. Adrienne, you brought up how funding is tight right now in the space. We have another question, which I think could sort of follow on from that. So it's not just funding, but there have been changes happening in the regulatory landscape as well. So what sort of changes have you been seeing, and particularly how is PBG Advanced Therapies preparing for these changes?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of changes. I mean, we've just recently had the tariffs announced with regard to what they would be for materials moving between Europe and the U.S., for example. So those kind of global regulatory frameworks beyond even the agencies that approve these products are affecting the industry. But also, we know that now AI is being used to expedite the review of a therapy's submission, which is an opportunity for the industry, right? If you have really robust digital data available and you're able to submit a document which is complete and substantial to the regulators and have that review be expedited using those tools, then great. Then you're going to get your therapy across the finish line faster, which is so important when your funding windows are, your runway is tight. So time is of the essence, time is money, and data can help you get there faster. So I think what we do is we also, as a service organization, allow for a company that doesn't have the ability to have a capital intensive investment made, whether it be in manufacturing capacity, whether it be in logistical management, logistic support, biorepository support, collection of the cells, or ultimately the investment in quality management systems and in the electronic batch record solutions. We have made those investments so that companies who are struggling to figure out how to maximize their cash runway and how to minimize their capital outlay as much as possible can survive kind of the era we're in, which is, we have accelerated timelines open to us. We have funding windows that are tight. We have constriction on cost because of tariffs and that being eating away at some of the margins of ultimately available to a company that's a drug developer. So all those complexities is what I think organizations like ours do to help companies survive this and accelerate through it, actually, because there will be those that don't make it. So it is an opportunity to win. It's an opportunity for companies to make conscious decisions on how they're navigating this environment and ultimately come out faster and stronger than others. So, I'm excited actually for those companies that embrace this as an opportunity for that to be met. The challenge accepted.
I like how you've framed the challenges as an opportunity for the companies out there. I think that's a good way of looking at it. We have another question, which I think addresses something that both of you briefly touched upon. What sort of strategies have you seen work best to avoid issues during a tech transfer? Would any of you like to go first on that?
I can definitely tackle that one. You said, what issues have we seen when companies are going through a tech transfer? Is that right? So I think the biggest bottleneck, so to speak, in a successful tech transfer is not performing early on a risk assessment and designing the process around what those critical quality parameters need to be. So often, someone who starts at the bench has an incredible science, has incredible ideas. There's so much promise there in some of the animal research and hopefully non-animal research that's been conducted. And they know they've got something strong, but they've built a process that is able to be carried out within the lab, but can't translate into a setting that can ultimately scale to a commercial setting. And then the questions come up of, if we make this change, does it affect something that's critical to quality? If we make that change, how do we know that it's not going to impact the performance of the drug? Is the efficacy well understood? Is the mechanism of action very well understood? So I think, going back to, if we're starting now and I was a drug developer, I would be really thinking about making sure I understand everything I can about what is actually critical, what processes, what ranges are required. We help, companies to understand that better too. But whenever there's a tech transfer, those are the things that cause delays. Is not a good understanding and characterization of the process, so that someone can make the changes necessary to adapt and scale without compromising the original intent of how the process will produce a product that will work.
I don't think I can add anything to that. I mean, I think that first person, perspective that Adrienne has, particularly, I would assume going through a lot of tech transfers, given that BBG Advanced Therapies is a CDMO. Nothing to add.
I will take that. But thanks, Adrienne, for, again, providing those sort of real world examples that hopefully a lot of attendees can take insights from. I think there's one more question, and this perhaps could be for you, Caitlyn. What advice would you give a smaller company to avoid a digital retrofit as they grow?
Good question. I think we've talked about this a bit. It's just really about thinking ahead, right? Adrienne was talking about this. It's about thinking ahead. It's about thinking about ultimately what you're going to do, because even if that science is great on the bench, as you scale up, you have to track it. You have to do all of the special sauce that I am not the one who knows these things. I'm not the scientist. But I do know that just really thinking back, if you think back to kind of to that build, that hierarchy build at the end of the presentation, is just starting somewhere, but making sure you start digital, I think, is the biggest thing. Find that partner, find your digital partner, and find somebody that you can scale with, and try as much as possible to limit the amount of disconnected or manual processes that you build into your process from the beginning, because that is going to require you to backtrack at some point. And so the more that you can start as you intend to continue, and we see this across all manufacturing. We're talking about cell and gene today, but we see this across all manufacturing, that you will inevitably hit a scale that your processes will start to break down, and they will start to impact the product that you are developing. And so really just starting in some kind of digital, scalable, controlled system.
Thanks for yes, Adrienne, anything you'd like to add there?
I think we've seen companies falter due to having to rework entire processes and programs because they couldn't scale. And just as Caitlyn said, you have to start with a digital program first, if at all possible, because that gives you the traceability to go back and articulate what changed in the process, what can we change. It's hard enough to go back through your program and have to potentially revisit things if something does go wrong. And the only reason why we would ever have to probably do a retrofit is something has gone wrong. So, I think avoiding that going wrong to begin with is the art of really robust risk assessment, planning, not rushing into things, taking the time it takes so it'll take less time. So, I think that's life advice, but that's advice for anyone who's getting into this. There's often the feeling of, I've got to rush into it. I think look at what you need to invest in to assure you can record things early on that are going to help you understand and unpack challenges before they become a problem, so that you don't have to retrofit. But if you have to make any change at all, the best way to do that is to be able to have your process well understood. And the way to get that done is with being able to digitize early and not have to retrofit to build it later on. So.
Yes, I think we have enough time for just one last question, but I'd like to remind our attendees to please continue using the Q&A box to enter your questions. If we haven't gotten to your question today, rest assured we will get back to it after this is done. So please keep sending in your questions. I think both our speakers today here are very open to answering them, so we would be happy to receive them. I think the one question I think that could be good to cap off this amazing discussion and also follows on with what you both just mentioned is building a digital foundation. So what role do you see CDMO, what role do you see for CDMOs in helping clients to build a digital foundation from the outset? How do you see that working out in your work?
I can take that on. So the question was about how does CDMO help a client with building that digital foundation? That's a great question, and this is exactly what we're designed to do, right? As a contract development and manufacturing organization, we bring the experience, we bring the digital infrastructure already established, so that those investments, especially at that early stage when a company is just starting out and they're going through clinical trials, they don't know how successful things will be, they don't know how far they have to go until their next round of funding, and whether the regulatory authorities will approve their product in time. And those questions are in the air. So investments are difficult to make. And that's the role we play, is we help de-risk a company's project, really, by helping them to have these tools at the ready, have the experience at the ready to help do the tech transfer, to help install their process into a robust quality management system, into a digital tool to electronically capture everything that goes on, to do it timely so that products can ultimately make their way to patients in the clinical trial like Donielle, patients who ultimately will benefit from the commercial products when those therapies become approved for broader use. So that's the role we play. We help those clients to, using our experience in our systems, to move their product forward so that it reaches more patients.
Caitlyn, anything you'd like to add there?
No, thank you. I think that Adrienne is the expert in this area.
Definitely. Well, I guess now it just comes upon me. It's my role to thank you all again for your questions, and to both Caitlyn Minton-Smith and Adrienne Mendoza for their presentations. I would also like to thank MasterControl for sponsoring this session. To all the attendees, you will receive an email tomorrow telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access it through the website, that's arenainternational.com/events. Please continue to ask questions, interact with the widgets, as the on-demand version will remain active and interactive. This just leaves me to thank you all once again. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.